Hey guys, welcome to the second video in the 2AR-FE 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine swap into the MR2 Spyder. This one's going to be covering electrical only, and it's going to depend heavily on this documentation that you should go over, but it'll show everything in the video. We're only going to be doing this video assuming that you're starting with these two sub-harnesses, the drive-by-wire harness and the ECU small plug pigtail. And also you're using the body controller that I provide. The pinouts for these are actually provided in the wiring documentation, so if you don't want to buy these two harnesses, you can make your own. I just simply won't be covering that in this video. We are going to need to make modifications to the stock engine harness, and to do that, some of what we're going to need is, this is a cutoff of the stock 1ZZ harness. There's a couple parts off of this that we're going to need. And we've also got a stock 2AR engine harness that we're going to be showing later when we get to modifications to that. You're going to need a couple small terminal extractors, and something I wanted to point out, a lot of people have problems with terminal extractors. They do have a sharp edge, and often after you've used them a little bit, they lose their edge. If you use a sharpening stone and you put an edge back on them, they work a whole lot better. So that's something to keep in mind. You might want to do that. Anyways, first thing we're going to cover is modifications to this, and we'll go from there. This sub-harness is a good place to start because there's a bunch of stuff on here that you can do to practice also before you get to the harness that matters. Specifically, these two connectors here, we don't need them off of here, but we can practice depinning these because we're going to need to depin the exact same connectors on the Scion TC harness, so you don't have to worry about messing these up. You can just practice. I bought this harness cut off, and for some reason it didn't come with this. This is actually a third plug that will be on here. Yours will likely be gray. I'm pretty sure they're all gray, but this is the same plug and it was white. Just made up for the fact that this harness didn't come with it. What we need to extract is this, along with as much wire length as we can. We need this, which 6 inches of wire is enough. We need this connector, and we need this grommet. So I'm going to go ahead and work on that. Alright, now that we've got all that isolated, the first thing we're going to do is depin this thing. Let's take that connector out, and we're just going to remove all the pins on here. And before we get too deep into this, the documentation has much better picture than I can do on video here. It talks about how to actually remove the terminals. It's right at the back of the documentation. It talks about it. So go by that. I'll show you on video. You're going to see it right here, but it's kind of hard to explain. Alright, the other thing we're going to do, this is going to end up being used to store unused connectors. There's just things on this thing that we're not going to use, and it's better to do this than to leave them dangling. So we're going to take this, and this here is actually connecting everything together. So if you open this, if you open the back of this, without stabbing yourself in the hand, you'll see in the back of this there's a connection strip. This connects all the wires together, and we don't actually want that for this. So just kind of pry it out. Get rid of it. Close that back up. That's not sealed, but it doesn't need to be because this is not sitting inside the cabin. So that's it for that for now. Put it right up here. Next is this one. The wire color on this is actually slightly different than what you'll have on yours. It's actually going to be yellow, brown, blue instead of yellow, white, blue. But again, I replaced this connector. So either way, this is that gray connector that came off the harness. We only need the yellow wire, so go ahead and pull the other two wires out so they're not just getting in the way. And push the lock back in. There we go. And finally, we want to de-pin all of these. Now, this lock is actually a little tougher than the other ones. You actually have to reach into it from the back side here and get it. And you'll hear click when it pops up. There's a lot more wires on this one, but it's the same thing. Just take your time. You'll want to save these wires because we're going to need a couple of them later. Alright, and this one, we're going to go ahead and leave the lock up on it because we're going to need to insert more wires in the future. Next, we've got the stock engine harness. As I mentioned earlier, this is a manual transmission harness. There will be some minor differences with the automatic, which we will not cover in this video. This is the part that comes down from the engine. You've got the large ECU plug here. We don't actually need to mess with any of that. Specifically, what we're going to be dealing with is this branch here and the starter wire. So we're actually going to unloom all of this and extract the starter wire also. But the start solenoid wire and the reverse wire we're going to leave on there. So just go ahead and unloom all this. And some of this might be useful when you're putting it back together. So don't throw it all out for now. And this we're going to use later, but we're getting rid of it for now. Now that you've got the harness taken apart as far as we need to, you're going to take a look at the documentation where we've got the BA1, BA2, and BA3 labeled. And all of these pins have names. And it's important to note the labels on here are with the connector facing upwards. So when you're pulling the pins out, don't reverse. There's a bunch of wires missing on here, open position. So if you find that you're trying to wire something and there's an open position, it's probably because you're looking at the connector from the wrong way. Also, if you look real close, I won't be able to get it on camera, but some of the pins on the front are numbered, and that's why I provided the diagrams with the numbers as well as the functions. Don't get confused. The BA3 and BA2 actually match two of the connectors on the MR2 Spyder. The pinout is not the same though, so that's why we're going to unpin all of this first, and then we're going to repin it there. That way we don't get the connectors confused even though they're the same ones. So, all right, I'm going to go real fast through this. I'm going to label all of these wires and depin them. Next part I have to apologize a little bit ahead of time for. Unfortunately, this is not available from Toyota or any other manufacturer that I could find. I'd love for the harness to come with that already, but unfortunately, at the moment it doesn't. If any of you know of a supplier that can supply this, then please tell me. What I found works though is first we're going to roll it back a little bit. Then we're going to use some of these interior clip removers. We're just going to put it in there just a little bit, and this has to go in this way. So I'm going to spread it and then try not to put too much stress on the wires. Just going to pass the connector right through the middle of that without stressing the wires sideways. And if you want, you can depin and repin those, but I find this to be less work, despite the fact that it is annoying. There you go, and it's through. And then all of these wires that we labeled, we're going to pass them through also in the same direction. And for this, it just helps to be patient and just do them one at a time. Otherwise you end up ripping the labels. all the wires are through. We're going to set this to the side. We need to work with these wires now. And we're just going to continue following the instructions. Next page, we've got the BC1 and BC2 connector for the MR2 Spyder. That's these guys. And the wire numbers, the wires here are indicated which one is. Now, something to keep in mind here, there's one labeled Alt Ignition 2. That's not in here. We're going to get that later. The 2 is important. That's not the same signal. So, just whichever ones we have for now, we're going to go ahead and pin them in here. Alright, so there's a few wires missing on these, but we've got everything we can get in there for now. Next in the documentation, there's a list of wires that we don't care about. You could just cut these and trim them back. You could even actually pull them entirely out of the harness, but most of these are actually additional air conditioner wires, so they literally go all the way to the other end of the harness, and they're kind of a pain in the rear to remove. So yeah, they go all the way to these connectors here on the end. But the nice thing about these is if you wanted extra sensors for aftermarket gauges and whatnot for oil pressure or oil temp, those go really close to right where you would need to put those sensors, and you could feel free to reuse those wires just for that. But for normal installations, these connectors that we had earlier, this blank connector that's got a plug for it, we're just going to take that list of wires and any which position in this connector, just put them in there, and now we don't have to worry about it. And next we're going to set our branch lengths. So what we're going to do is even out this wire and this wire and make everything the same length. And then, and I separated out the wires that we haven't done anything with yet, just to keep them untangled. And then we're going to measure, this doesn't have to be super precise, but approximately from the end here to about 15 inches. Grab that, and we're going to tape it. We've got our length set, and now we've got these 7 wires that we still don't have anything to do with them. They actually go to the E4 connector that we pulled out earlier. Unfortunately, these don't fit directly in there. It's a different size terminal, which is why I had you guys save the wires when we pulled that connector apart. We don't have matching colors, but we have enough of all of the right gauges. So let's go ahead and the wires are going to stay the same length, and you're simply going to use the documentation and cut the wire, crimp this end on it, and then go from there. Now, my preferred method is using these Delphi ratcheting crimpers and these uninsulated barrels, and then cover them in dual wall heat shrink. Now, specifically dual wall heat shrink, these crimps are going to be inside the cabin, so they're not going to be catching the weather, but it's still a really good idea. Dual wall means that it's got glue on the inside, and it prevents any water ingress. Especially, this is a convertible, so it's a good idea. All right, we'll do this and fast forward. And let's get this done. Careful not to crimp the same exact wire back on there. And next, this connector that you guys might remember, it's BC3. There's one wire on here. This is needed to get the daytime running lights running. So this connector is actually going to go with these connectors. And this, the other end, is going to go to E4. So just use wire, just make sure that you got enough wire length to go across that and over. And it's fine if you got a little extra length. It's easy to tuck it into the harness. So this is the DRL wire. The last wire is the Alt Ignition 2, and those go between BC1 and E4. BC1 is this one, and E4 is this one. And finally, grab a heat gun and heat shrink all the connections. Alright, now that everything is actually finished wired, What we're going to do is we set temporary branch lengths using this tape earlier. We probably shouldn't have used quite that much, but in the wiring diagram there's this branch length diagram. So we're going to undo this tape and we're going to follow this diagram and set everything in there. That way the wire just sits inside the car like it's supposed to. The only thing to note is these measurements are to the firewall flange, and what that means is this line right here, which is where it actually clamps into the firewall, is what these numbers are measuring to. So let's go ahead and do that. And this one here is just needs to stay out of the way, so you can just tape it back over on top of itself like this. Which brings us to this. Now you'll notice some of these wires, namely the ones I went to E4, are going to be tighter than the rest. Now this is actually enough length. So we've actually got an extra inch here, so we're good. So what we're actually going to do is just take these wires and we're going to double them back up. You have to, there's going to be a couple different lengths of wires in here, so you have to kind of find a group of wires that are the right amount, too much. Just kind of double them back up on top of themselves like this. And then you don't have to do it all in one shot, so you clamp this up right here. And then you're going to continue on, you're going to do the next one and until all the wires are all the same length. And then you hide all of these crimes right in a wire loom. And now everything is roughly the same length. And from here we need to loom up the engine harness. So the only part that needs to be done absolutely is the outside, but cleaning up the inside just is nice too. So I'm going to go ahead and do both. And we're going to do this in high speed because it's nothing particularly fancy. And there's only one last thing to consider on the harness at this point. This branch right here, so this is the mass airflow sensor and this is the purge valve. If you're leaving the purge valve in the stock location, because the harness is coming from the opposite direction, this will need to be lengthened about 12 inches. The alternative is to just move the purge valve to where this wants it to be. So that's optional. And honestly, you don't even have to make the decision now. This is just as easy to do once the whole thing's in the car, so might as well just leave it alone for now. Alright, that's it for electrical. In the next video, we're going to put the harness on the engine, and we're going to do the chassis preparation, so the minor modifications that need to be done to the chassis before it gets installed, and then we're actually going to install the engine. Alright, see you guys in the next video.